watching WeAllBe News Radio, News Free Dixie for the 21st century. I'm Thaddeus Matthews.
The real crime here is undereducating brilliant people, limiting their resources. Mind you, when people talk about these so-called basketball players, they really they weak to me. They sound weak to me. Because Fred Smith was a billionaire. He could have owned the Grizzlies many times over, and he died in Memphis. Fred Smith lived in Memphis. This is one of the wealthiest people in the country. A multi-billionaire lived in so-called poverty-stricken Memphis. How's that possible? A multi-billionaire lived in so-called poverty-stricken Memphis? A multi-billionaire who made his fortune dealing with talented people in Memphis. Yeah, they got now, as an Indian, is the CEO. They bring in Indians from India to come to work at the corporate headquarters here in Memphis. But you got a criminally undereducated class of people that if you had the proper STEM training in our school system, they could easily be taking them jobs they're bringing Indians over to do. Black folks, we the original mathematicians in the history of the world. Black people from Africa brought civilization to Europe. They taught them how to wash themselves properly. They knew that tuberculosis was a contagious 100 years before the Europeans did. But yet Africa is backwards. You got so-called people telling me they bringing Christianity to Africa. Well, Christianity and Judaism was invented in Africa. How you gonna bring it back to the source? That's an insult. The oldest Bible in the world comes from Ethiopia. They say the Ark of the Covenant is in Ethiopia. So who are you teaching, white man? Where did the Greeks and the Romans get their stuff from? How you going to tell us you're going to bring stuff back to the place where everything came out of? Even here in this country. Louis Armstrong didn't go to MIT. He didn't go to Berkeley. What he had, they can't teach in the white folks school. That was God given. But getting back, Fred Smith, the billionaire, lived in Memphis. He wasn't afraid of Memphis. He wasn't afraid to deal with black people in Memphis. A lot of black folks. My mom worked for Fred Smith and FedEx for years. I mean, thank God for Fred Smith giving black folks a chance. I heard all type of stories on my social media about Fred Smith. People that's like, singing his praises, black people. He put a lot, he set up a lot of black folks, in terms of making money, providing for their families to help them start families, right? And Fred Smith is interesting because I have a Fred Smith story. Like when I just got out of college, I booked a show, do an art show at the corporate headquarters, the world corporate headquarters of FedEx in Memphis, Hatch Cross and Winchester in Memphis. I got with this lady named Sharon Greenspan. She was the curator for booking exhibitions and stuff like that. So I was able to get some of my artwork in the world corporate headquarters in Memphis, Tennessee. Our show was well received. I actually reached out to Fred Smith to invite him to come look at my art, to check it out. Maybe we could meet, check out my artwork. Now, I don't know if he ever did or not, but he did write a letter to me, letting me know that he appreciated, what I had to offer, and he thanked, he was saying he was glad I could help him, that he could help me, promote my art. But I don't think he ever went. He could have went. But the fact that he would take time out and just write a letter, even if he didn't write the letter, his secretary wrote the letter. By the time he would tell her or somebody, hey, go ahead, answer the young man's email inquiry or whatever. So they sent me a letter, whatever. I appreciated that. But when I think about interest by Fred Smith, I want to be balanced. Like, there's a lot of great things about Fred Smith. He was a patriot. He was a Marine. He did 2 tours of duty in Vietnam as a pilot. So he wasn't he was a badass. He got his Bronze Star, I think a Silver Star, and 2 Purple Hearts. He started FedEx, back in '73. And there's a story about him, how he had to go to Vegas. They were short gas for a week. So they were short $23,000 to cover gas for a week for the airplanes. And they say he took his last $5,000 of the company's money, went to Vegas and won $24,000 to cover that upcoming week's gas expenses. Now I don't know, is it true or not? I guess it's true now because people said it. I don't think he ever refuted that, but that's the story. I think he played a game of blackjack or something. I don't know. Y'all can look that up. But that's part of the legend of of Fred Smith doing that. So I thought that was very interesting. This man believed in his vision, but like with Fred Smith, he still had white privilege, though, right? His father was one of the co-founders of what we know as Greyhound Bus, because he had the Memphis route that ended up becoming part of Greyhound. So that's why I say he's one of the co-founders. This is his father, right? His father also founded Tuttle House, which is the forerunner or the predecessor of what we know as Waffle House. Because some of the people that was involved in Tuttle House, they ended up starting Waffle House. So his father was a visionary and maverick in his own right. And so his son inherited that trait, I guess, as well as that money, those millions of dollars. Because his father, I believe, died when he was about 4 years old. Fred Smith was born August 11th, 1944, I believe, by the sources. But I want to talk about this. Fred Smith went to Yale. He was classmates and friends with George W. Bush, as well as John Kerry. George W. Bush became a 2-term president under questionable circumstances. And John Kerry was a senator from Massachusetts who was the runner-up in the 2004 presidential election to George W. Bush. Like I said, both of those elections was kind of weird, especially 2000, because quite frankly, Al Gore should have won. He was about to win Florida, and the Supreme Court stepped in and called it in favor of George W. Bush. And it had an impact on history as we look at it 25 years from now. This November, the impact that had on our history, the last quarter of a century, actually. And also Fred Smith was in Skull and Bones. Skull and Bones, y'all. They made movies about Skull and Bones. Basically, it's the Illuminati. Fred Smith was a member of the Illuminati. This is the same Skull and Bones that allegedly George W. Bush's grandfather, Prescott Bush, they allegedly stole the skull of Geronimo, the famous Native American fighter. They basically stole his skull and brought it back to Yale for Skull and Bones. That's the legend of it. And also, this is the last place where Booker T. Washington spoke. His last public speech was at Yale, the home of Skull and Bones. And I believe a former president, William Howard Taft, he's part of Skull and Bones. He was a president. He was the vice president for Teddy Roosevelt. Became the first president to become the chief Supreme Court justice. So he was a Supreme Court justice, chief of the Supreme Court after he was president. But it was all Skull and Bones. So I think Booker T. Washington, he did a speech at Yale. Ended up dying under questionable circumstances. I did an interview with a sister who wrote a book called Death in 60 Days. What really happened to Booker T. Washington. And from her sources, she said he was poisoned. So nobody really knows how Booker T. Washington, they never talk about exactly how he died. He just all of a sudden dropped dead. Okay. So anyway, Fred Smith, Skull and Bones, Vietnam vet, just like John Kerry. Because you remember how John Kerry, he was a Swift Boat veteran. The Swift Boat Veterans for Truth was saying that he was a liar about his wartime service. And George W. Bush, he dodged the draft. I think he became part of I want to say the Texas National Guard, if anything, but he dodged the draft. But John Kerry went over there, and they act like he was a fraud. This back in 2004. How we forget about things. But anyway, George W. Bush wanted Fred Smith to be his Secretary of Defense. He asked him back in 2000. Like I said, they were really good friends from Yale, Skull and Bones. He turned him down because he was trying to run his business. Then he asked him after his 2004 victory, I want you to be my Secretary of Defense. And once again, Fred Smith turned it down. And then Fred Smith actually supported John McCain back in 2008. So he was a Republican. But it was interesting he turned him down twice, though, because I guess he knew, They were trying to find that yellow cake, whatever the hell they were doing. There was no weapons of mass distraction. It was weapons of mass distraction, but there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. It's like how they were trying to blame Iraq for 9/11. How could they do 9/11? We control their airspace. We had things in place where we were starving their people. And you think about how funny not funny, but think about the axis of evil, right? George W. Bush, remember he said the axis of evil was Iraq, Iran, and North Korea. 25 years later, whatever, 20 something years later, the only country they took out was Iraq, because Iraq was a paper tiger. Everybody else was the real deal. You couldn't touch North Korea without getting involved with Russia and China. And Iran's Iran. You ain't gonna, even we're gonna talk about that tonight as well. But I want to talk about Fred Smith. And interesting life. He had 10 kids. One of his daughters was a renowned wildlife photographer who passed away, unfortunately, from an illness back in 2005. He has a daughter who is a well-known, prolific Hollywood movie producer. She actually produced the Oscar-winning Blind Side movie. And then that story is in contention. It's being contested by the guy who was the subject of that story. It's being contested. It's been a long, bitter legal battle about, with that movie as it relates to the subject of the movie, a former football player. But his son was, I didn't know he had a son who was also the former head coach for the NFL's Atlanta Falcons. And Fred Smith actually had a significant ownership in the Washington Redskins, not too long ago. Interesting guy. But this is what I want to talk about as it relates to Mr. Smith. It's no shade. I just want to balance it out. Something that I picked up. No shade, actually. No shade. I'm going to share this screen. Very distinguished gentleman. I want to talk about this incident here. Share my screen. This is Wikipedia. Everybody say don't believe Wikipedia. Well, don't believe corporate news either. Don't believe anybody. Just do your own research. Take a look. It's all online. God dog it. Let me see. Share this part right here. It talks about a forgery, indictment, and car crash. As it relates to Mr. This is from the Wikipedia page. They haven't taken it down. I just want to for the history. Before they change the history, they always like changing the narrative and stuff. You know how they go. Now, this is what it says. It says forgery, indictment, and car crash. On January 31st, 1975, so that was 50 years ago, Fred Smith was indicted for forgery by a federal grand jury. The suit was filed by Smith's two half-sisters. The lawsuit alleged Smith had forged documents to obtain a $2 million bank loan, and he and his executives of his family's trust fund had sold stock from the fund for a loss of $14 million. A warrant for Smith's arrest was issued, for which Smith posted bond with federal authorities in Memphis. Smith was later found not guilty on the forgery charge. The same evening of his forgery indictment, Smith was involved in a fatal hit and run in which he killed a 54-year-old handyman named George C. Sturgill. Smith was arrested and charged with leaving the scene of a crash and driving with an expired license. He was released on $250 bond. On a $250 bond, y'all. All charges were later dismissed. This was not the first time Smith was involved in a fatal car crash. During his first summer break from Yale, Smith was back in Memphis driving out to a lake with friends when he lost control of the car he was driving, causing the vehicle to flip and killing the passenger in the front seat. The cause of the crash was never determined. So, I mean, wow, this guy got 9 lives, right? He got more lives than Ted Kennedy. If you look at this, and they got legal documentation. Now, but I just want to show what Wikipedia had, but they got the legal documentation. And I actually heard about this type of stuff with Smith. And I dismissed it. I ain't pay no attention to it. But it was out there. It's been out there, y'all. So why, Brother Ron, would you show all this? Well, it's not to disparage or belittle his contribution. His contribution was massive towards like Memphis, towards the country, even for the world. And like Tupac said, only God can judge him. But he went to war. He won medals for taking lives. Then he was able to get out of taking lives when he was a civilian and accident, but hit and run, and he got off for $250 bond, and the charges were dismissed. So I guess it was a payoff. I don't know. Maybe he committed himself to redeem himself by those things that happened when he was a younger man. Maybe FedEx was his redemptive story because he helped a lot of people achieve their dreams and make their realities a successful, viable one, the American dream. So I just wanted to put that out there. I think because, like, Eddie Griffin, I saw him a couple months ago. He was great. He was, he didn't disappoint. The night that I saw him, I think he was celebrating his 43rd anniversary in show business. So he's a soul survivor. But Eddie Griffin said that anytime you have a great black man, when a great black man passes, there's an asterisk by his name. Like, oh, he's great at this, but this happened. Like Kobe was a phenomenal basketball player, but that thing in Colorado. But with Fred Smith, nobody's really doing that. I'm not saying people should do that, but people should know that history, that even he had to, deal with some things. And yet he was able to overcome those obstacles and make a name for himself, as well as a powerful, I say, baby, even lasting legacy. Because now they're in talks about, renaming the airport, Memphis International Airport, for Fred Smith. And I have no problem with that. I mean, he was an aviation pioneer. He did a lot for the city. He did a lot for the airport. The airport was able to get all this money because Fred Smith headquartered FedEx there. So they were able to get all this money. So I understand, but I remember back in 2017, though, I went to the airport authority to talk to them about renaming the Memphis International Airport after Jimmy Lunsford, who was an aviation pioneer too. Before Fred Smith was born, Jimmy Lunsford took airplane lessons in 1939, brought his first airplane in 1940 for what would be almost $500,000 today. Flew to concert gigs. This is a black man. James Brown brought a jet. I think James Brown was the first black person in America to own a jet, but Jimmy Lunsford owned an airplane. This back in the Great Depression. So I said, why not name the airport after him? Then I said, well, also, we should name the airport after him and Luke Weathers. Luke Weathers was a black man from Memphis. Folks was in the grocery business, I believe. He was a legendary Tuskegee Airman, and he was the first black person in the history of Memphis that was given the key to the city. And they had a parade for him down Bill Street. And he passed away maybe in the last, I want to say 15 years. And he's buried with full military honors in Arlington National Cemetery outside of D.C. I said, why not name the airport after Luke Weathers and Jimmy Lunsford? This is like a black city. Now we know it's the blackest city in America. And these white folks are looking at me. Oh, look at this Negro. Okay, kiddo, we heard what you had to say. Let's take I took a picture with them. I gave them some Jimmy Lunsford art I did, and that was it. That's back in 2017. I even made a change.org petition to try to get the airport name after Jimmy Lunsford and Luke Weathers, the great Tuskegee Airmen, black aviation pioneers. This country did not want to train Tuskegee Airmen. This country did not want to help Bessie Coleman fly. She had to go to France to get her pilot's license, an international pilot license. But yet they trained Admiral Yamamoto. Admiral Yamamoto was a guest of the Navy. He went to Harvard University, and then they taught him how to fly planes as well in America. And guess what he did with the information? He helped mastermind the Pearl Harbor invasion. They got us involved in World War II, December 7, 1941, a day which will live on in infamy, according to FDR. Admiral Yamamoto was a lover of American culture. American society accepted him over black people who had been here forever. They taught him how to fly planes and let him go to Harvard University, right? And yet what he did with that, he went to bomb Pearl Harbor. Just like his interest in Civil War, America trains his enemies better than anybody. Because you had, generals that were Confederate generals, they served in the United States military. They went to West Point. So basically, you had this high killing rate because they knew each other moves. The Union soldiers, the Union generals knew the Confederate generals moves and vice versa because they all were classmates at West Point. America is a wicked place. So with that said, I propose that they name it after these black men. And some other people said they should name it after Isaac Hayes. And I said, this is cool. All this is cool. I think some folks see Elvis Presley. That's cool too. But I think Fred Smith, why not him? I mean, he really brought a lot of money into Memphis. One of the most important Memphis people of all time. So whatever. They're probably going to fast track it. By the end of this week, he probably have the airport named after Fred Smith. But yeah, I, as a black man, everything got to be a civil rights movement with us. But anyway,